Today we're joined by accomplished podcaster, blogger, and author Rene Ritchie, who has already accumulated over 140,000 subscribers on YouTube with more than 10 million views since going indie earlier this year. Rene, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Speaking of your transition to creating content independently, I don't think you could have chosen a more difficult time in recent history to make that move. Did you find the state of the world made it more challenging or at least frightening to move on from your position at Mobile Nations? Or has the increased isolation allowed you more time to kind of double down and focus on your work?
Yes. I mean, when I originally gave 1 month notice to Future, who had bought Mobile Nations by that point, because I was still anticipating a March Apple event and I didn't want to leave them in the lurch without anybody to give them coverage. And then during that month, the whole world changed. And I was really afraid that I'd just done the stupidest thing that I could ever possibly do. Because right away, all the marketing money, all the sponsor money started drying up as people got afraid. But people had to watch something. So it was like a mixed blessing. But I was really, really wondering if I had the worst timing ever.
And it's incredible how you're able to churn out such well-researched and high production value content on an almost daily basis. I'm really curious what a day in the life of Rene Ritchie looks like. Do you have any time for hobbies or a social life, or is it just sun up to sundown coming up with creative wordplay for your next video?
I have either the luck or the misfortune of my job being my hobby. I used to work in product marketing, and it was for enterprise software, and it was just deathly boring. Like, it was paid well, it was fun in a way, but I was always just on the forums back then and reading Trio Central and Gadget and Gizmodo and all of those sites, and it just seemed so interesting to me that it became something that I just wanted to do. And then when I got hired to do it, I had very bad boundaries because I'd left my office and I was working from home, and I was just so interested. I wanted to do it. And it's the same now. I wake up in the morning and I check to see what's happened, and then I usually film sometime between 8 and 10 in the morning, and then spend the day editing and upload in the evening so that I know everything is in place typically for the next day to put it live. And then I just rinse and repeat that. And if I'm slow or I have an appointment or a social function or something, maybe I miss a day occasionally. But otherwise, especially now because we're in lockdown again, there's just not much else to do.
I think a lot of people would spend a lot of time just like dreaming of being in a situation of creating so much content, but you've just gone ahead and did it, which is really cool to see.
Oh, thank you. It's a grind. Like, it is a grind. Intellectually, it's easy to say I want to do a video, or I want to write a blog post, or I want to produce a podcast, and you both certainly know this, but doing it once is sort of a scary challenge. And then realizing right after you finish, you accomplish something, but oh no, I've got to do it again tomorrow or next week, or in the case of blogging, like next hour, and then being able to do it over and over and over and over again. I don't think anybody knows what it is going in, because I think then fewer people would go into it, but it definitely takes a single-mindedness to get it accomplished.
And it's the situation right now with so many people working from home, that kind of work-life balance, that line is being blurred more and more. Do you have a way that maybe you personally combat the burnout that could be associated with that?
So when I first started working at Mobile Nations, it was a very small company. It was a single owner operator, and there was just never hours. Like, if you could finish your work in 2 hours, and you could just take the rest of the day off. There was, I always kept working because I was interested. But if you wanted to go see a movie in the middle of the day, but then if Google bought Samsung at 9 p.m., you were expected to cover it. So it was always just very amorphous. And I never minded that because I thought it was a good trade-off, because I work very flexibly anyway. And sometimes early in the morning or late at night is when you have your quiet time to work. But now it's just, there is no boundary anymore. I'm either watching videos or making videos, and it is tough. And especially because I can't see anybody in person. I barely go out, barely go to the grocery store. Videos have become, just putting one foot in front of the other is now making one video in front of the other. And it's probably terrible long term, but it's how I'm surviving 2020.
Well, as much as I'd love to make this whole show an interview, our podcast is primarily focused on reacting to and discussing the top posts on the Apple subreddit. And it'd be a complete waste not to get your insight on what's trending right now. So I'll hand it off to James for going through some of these topics.
I thought we could just kick off with iPhone 12, 12 Pro, 12 Mini, whatever is going to be coming out, because Rene, you put an amazing leak bomb video. I think that was the title of it a couple of days ago or a week ago. So should we kick off with that and talk about all the rumors / leaks / whatever you want to call it for this year?
For sure.
I'm in an interesting boat right now when it comes to the iPhone 12. This is the first time in a long time that I'm just not excited about it. In a world that's full of Galaxy Z Folds and Surface Duos, it's just, there's so many other so many other devices that seem way more exciting to me, and I'm in a tough position where I'm so sucked into the Apple ecosystem. I've got Macs, iPads, my house is configured with HomeKit, I've got HomePods, I've got Apple Watch. So to even be looking outside of the walled garden of Apple is scary now, because it would require such a large investment. And previously, where this cohesive ecosystem was like a big selling point to me, it's feeling a little restrictive right now. And what I find myself doing is not begging Apple to let me out or looking for ways out, but more just like begging Apple to please do something exciting so that my eyes don't wander anymore. I'm curious how you feel about the iPhone 12. Do you think that this is going to be maybe more of a major update than I'm anticipating at this point? Maybe something to be excited about?
I think just in general, the smartphones in particular are so mature that every year is an iterative upgrade. And for 90% of the market, that's fine, because they're only buying every 2, 3, 4, even 5 years. So for them now, I think the largest anticipated upgrade block is iPhone 7 to iPhone 12, and that'll be a really big upgrade for them. But I'm similar to you. The only thing I keep in the back of my head is a differentiation between tools and toys. And for me, the iPhone is still a tool in that I shoot a lot of B-roll with it. I record a lot of things with it. And Apple has done a lot of work at the core silicon level to make it 100% reliable. Like, I never miss a picture. I never miss a frame of video. I never miss any audio. If I need to depend on something to get work done, I'm still defaulting to an iPhone, just because I've covered CES with my former Android Central colleagues often enough to know that like a Google Pixel will drop frames and not take photos, and they'll be cursing and reaching for a Huawei or reaching for a Samsung, but then the color balance or something will be off and the video will be ruined, and I can't deal with that. But for toys, I am totally all about everything, like this, from the Surface Duo to the Fold 2. I love that stuff. I think it's the future. I just think Apple is almost always content to wait for everyone else to sort of do the early introduction work and sit back and see what the problems are, what people like, what people don't like, and then sort of work on their version for a couple of years down the road.
You don't think it might be a case of, say, when phones got bigger and Apple was left in the lurch because they had just small phones and Samsung and everyone else was making these huge phones, and I think they probably lost a fair few customers during that period. Might something like that happen again, though, if folding phones do become reliable and widespread, and the software works nicely on them, and then Apple's takes another 2 years to release it, and then it's just leaking customers during those years?
So this is where I get in trouble, and I often get called an Apple apologist, because Apple doesn't talk. They don't tell you what they're doing. So I spend an inordinate amount of time going through back channels and try to figure out what exactly their thinking is on things and then explain it. So I'm going to preface this by saying, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just going to try to explain how Apple sees it. And then anybody listening can say, okay, that makes sense, or no, now I understand what they're doing and I think they're even more stupid. So I leave that totally up to the audience. But Apple had big screen phones for years before releasing them. They started with the iPhone 4 generation. They had much bigger versions of that. They just didn't like the compromises. They didn't like the quality of the displays back then, the way the Pentile displays were working with zero anti-aliasing. They had a bunch of issues with it, and they didn't think that the quality was good enough. And when you look at things like the HTC Thunderbolt that lasted all of 2 minutes on a charge, there were a lot of compromises. And they've had folding phones since, I think, 2011, 2012, and every year they work on them. And every year they look at them and say, it's not what we want yet. This is sort of a class 1 device, and we're only going to release it when it's class 3. And sometimes they get a little ahead of themselves. Like I think the Apple Watch, just by Apple standards, was arguably a year too early. The hardware was running at thermal limits, and the messaging wasn't set yet. And I think the Apple Watch Series 2 was like the typical Apple first release product. But I think also the market is accelerating. Back then, like it took them 10 years to make a tablet and nobody cared because tablet PC wasn't that compelling. It took them 10 years to make an iPhone, and it was really an early adopter thing. It wasn't near mainstream acceptance at all. And I think the gap from going from early adopters, like a $2,000 fragile folding Fold 1, to a mainstream adopted, $900, $1,000 Fold 3 or 4 is very small now. So I think they can still play that game a little bit, but their window and their margin for error is no longer the same. Like they didn't lose many sales by not making a bigger phone because they owned 80% to 90% of the premium smartphone market. It's sort of like the sales they lost to Verizon when they were only on AT&T. They gobbled up all of AT&T till they had to go to Verizon. They gobbled up all share of 4.5-inch phones until they had to go bigger, and then 5-inch phones. And then they gobbled up more when they went bigger. But the margin for error there is so small now, I think it really is incumbent upon them to start accelerating. And that probably means taking more risks and maybe getting bloody a little more in the early market.
You clearly have a lot more insight coming from the inside than we do. But from what I've been able to see from the outside for the last couple of years is there's been the rumor here and there about these folding phones that Apple's working on. But more so than that is that allegedly Apple really thinks that the future is AR. And is it reasonable to assume that maybe they're not focusing so hard on a folding device because they think 2 years, 3 years from now, everyone's going to be wearing Apple Glass to do their communicating?
I think that one of the things that's really interesting is that AR is one of the very few forward-looking technologies that Tim Cook's been willing to talk about, because usually you just get that stone wall of we don't discuss future products. But with AR and with automation, he's been, positively gabby by Apple standards. And I think because both of those things are interrelated in that they're both like the same core project. They rely on massive amounts of environmental ingestion, computer vision, all that machine learned training, all of those things. But I also think Apple sees AR the way they see LCD. Like it's not going to be a product. Apple never sold LCD. They sold displays, iPhones that had screens, iPads that had screens, cinema displays, all of those things. But LCD was not a product for them. And I think AR is the same way, that and we're talking further in the future, they'll have a variety of opportunistic endpoints, and you'll pick the size of endpoint you want. And maybe some people will be comfortable increasingly with AR endpoints, which are glasses that let you see wall-size screens or desk-size screens. And maybe some people will want something physical, and you'll be able to get everything from a very small, convenient phone to a tablet to a larger desk-mounted display. But I think that's part of the continuum where they'll have whatever micro LED or whatever they're using for conventional displays, and then AR will just be the next interface layer on top of that.
I think about it in the same way. I believe it's Phil Schiller who said this initially, but that they look at every product category that they sell as trying to cannibalize the next step up. So iPads are cannibalizing Macs, and phones are cannibalizing iPads, and Apple Watch is maybe cannibalizing iPhone. And I feel like the Apple Glass it would cannibalize everything they sell. That could be an all-in-one device depending on how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. You have a couple barriers of entry where, like, even a watch, a lot of people didn't wear a watch. And when you look now, I think last time Tim Cook said 75% of people are still new to the watch. So obviously there's nowhere near the market saturation that there is for a phone yet. And people who wear glasses will be 100% okay with it. Take my glasses, make them smart, put a computer, same way you put a computer in my watch, you put a computer in my glasses. That's great. And other people are like, wake me up when there's sunglasses because that's all I wear. And that technology is a little bit further out. And then other people are like, I don't like the idea of something on my face. And that I think will go down when they see the utility. But yeah, it sounds weird to say, but these are all varying degrees of external cybernetics right now. We're getting all of this enhancement through what we hold in our hand or put on our wrist or eventually put on our face. But that's still a barrier, I think, to some people.
I was kind of in the opposite boat. It was last year when rumors really started picking up about these AR glasses, and maybe we'll see them here in the near future. And that all started probably a month or two after I decided to make the jump and pay for a LASIK surgery, so I would no longer have to wear glasses, just in time to put on a pair of Apple Glass and continue wearing glasses the rest of my life.
The LiDAR camera system is something that's supposed to be coming to the iPhone 12 this season. And as we know, it came to the iPad Pro earlier in the year. There wasn't too much... it wasn't too much from Apple about exactly what it was for, although there were some demos about it. And the Apple News, or the rumor mills or whatever you call it, would say that the LiDAR camera system was in there so that developers could get ready for it to come to the iPhone and to create something around the camera system. I don't think I've really seen anything really come of that in this, however many months it was, maybe 6 months since then. So do you think there's any real clear purpose for this LiDAR camera system yet, or do you have any theories about like a future use that Apple's thinking of that we haven't thought of?
Yeah, that was such a weird iPad. And because the Apple Silicon team was too busy to make an A1310 because they were busy working on Apple Silicon and the A14 series. And even the software team was too busy to make a proper camera app for it. It doesn't even do portrait mode. One of the weirdest things I've ever experienced in an Apple interface is you tap the portrait mode button and it flips you around to the selfie camera because that part was already done. And I guess they did have to get it out that early because there were some things they wanted to do in terms of developing LiDAR-based technologies. But my understanding is they've got a really, really good next-generation camera app they've been working on for years, and that it's going to take everything that the LiDAR scanner and the new camera system in general can ingest for it, and not exactly be true depth on the back. It'll have that sort of capabilities, but just be able to collect way better depth data so that portrait mode, for example, will extend better into low light. Night mode will work better. I have my fingers crossed for computational depth video because some of the Android phones have tried it. It hasn't been very good yet, but maybe with LiDAR it'll get even better. And then you just start to be able to build up the technologies that you'll see in the glasses, because the glasses are apparently LiDAR-based, not camera-based, for both privacy and just general environmental ingestion reasons. And once you can start knowing what's around you, you can start layering the additional data on top of that. And I think when we do see, because I've been waiting years for the new apps they've apparently been working on, when we do see those and we see this integrated not just as a LiDAR scanner but as part of a camera system, it'll be way more interesting than whatever we got and why ever we got it with the iPad Pro.
Do you foresee depth video replacing your current setup, which is, I'm sure, a couple of high-end video or mirrorless cameras?
I don't think so, at least not for a while, because physics is really hard to beat. And like Canon brings big sensor and big glass, and what Apple and Google have been doing is bringing big compute. And you can do a lot of things with that. It's amazing what they accomplish. And for some situations, like if you are filming from bright light to darkness, because of the small size of the sensor and the speed of the processor, they can crunch, like they can just crush the multiple exposures they need to get really well exposed, extended dynamic range video that you just simply can't get from a camera. You'd have to try to get a huge amount of stops from a cinema style camera, like an Arri style camera, which is $60,000. And they can do that on an iPhone, but you can't beat that big glass and you can't beat that big sensor for just capturing video, especially now, or higher end photography. It's a simulation that comes close, but always still breaks down around the edges.
I was interested to hear that you actually used the iPhone for some of your B-roll, though, because I'm not sure. I haven't been watching any of your videos and thought, oh, there's something shot on an iPhone. So that was cool to hear.
It's good because it's small, it's maneuverable, you can get into a lot of places, and it's stabilized. Like I've been shooting B-roll with the Canon EOS R. I haven't gotten the newer EOS R5 yet because it's got all these reported overheating issues. But it's just so shaky when I handhold it that it's almost unusable. And the iPhone for close range stuff isn't that different and is rock solid stable. And you never really appreciate everything that you can do with a phone style camera, like any of the high-end phone style cameras now, until you have to.
You should be combining it, maybe an R5 with some stabilized lenses, and you get, was it something like 7 or 8 stops of stabilization? That would be insane.
I'm vacillating a lot because the R5 has those overheating issues, and if I ever took it to, like when the world stops ending and I can go to an event, I don't know if it would last an entire hands-on area or let me shoot everything I need to shoot. So then I was looking at the the Sony I'm playing A7S3 or even the Canon C70, just trying to figure out something that I can use reliably for B-roll with my existing Canon glass, and it's harder than choosing your next smartphone.
Tell me about it.
Well, I'm not a photography person, and it all sounds like gibberish to me. But I am curious about what this new sensor shift stabilization that's rumored to be coming on maybe the 12 Pro Max exclusively. Could that solve for some of these issues?
So for me, it's sort of like a diagonal step sideways and slightly up, because now you have basically, as the sensor moves, you have the gyro system matching that with the lens moving. So it's basically two objects moving with the lens trying to keep the sensor stable. And this would move to just the entire sensor, as far as I understand it, moving so that it would be both less expensive, simpler, which is always good because the more parts, the easier they break. But also it would, because there's less intermediation, there would be just slightly better pixel quality. I don't think it's revolutionary. I think it reduces complexity from the camera system in total.
I don't have any special insight into how that's going to work, but I know they're just like stacking on stabilization. Like you've got the software and you've got the hardware stabilization, and what you can get out of an iPhone is already fairly amazing. So anything that they do is, like even fairly new Canon mirrorless cameras don't even have stabilization in body.
No,
so
the C70 doesn't.
Oh, the C70, was that the one just released or announced last week? Yeah. Okay.
It's got electronic stabilization plus whatever the lens gives you.
Yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, Apple is a long way ahead in some aspects when it comes to video stabilization.
The 7P lens elements excites me too. Like it's geeky technology, but they went from 5 to 6 elements. I think they still have 5 in the ultra wide, but going to 7 elements across the board. Again, it's small improvements, but that's sort of what you do, I think, when you have mature camera systems. But still, every step better, I think, cascades through the entire stack and results just in not necessarily always better images, but better images across a wider range of worse conditions.
We've been on the iPhone 12 for quite a long time already, and we haven't even got to our other 4 topics. But are you, Rene, excited about the iPhone 12 mini at all?
I like it because it's been sort of a long time coming. Like there's always been people who like the small phone, who enjoy the small phone, and there's very few companies that continue to cater to it. Like you just get a couple of variants every once in a while. And the initial problem Apple had was just funding it, because the iPhone X was expensive for them to make. And people who wanted smaller phones, also some of them want flagship phones. Some people just want less expensive phones, but others want flagships. And that's basically like building custom everything. And you have to be careful with smaller phones too, because they have smaller batteries. And Apple's been putting really powerful chips in their phones, and that can brown out the system. That's what we basically saw with the whole battery throttling earlier. It's just the chips got too powerful for batteries that were overworn and would just turn off. So I'm interested to see sort of that they've now been able to scale production, going from 2 phones to 3. Well, I guess 1 modern class phone to 2 to 3, and now 4 of them. And rumor has it they'll get it down to $650, which I think is a good price for that. And it'll just make a lot of small phone people happy.
I'm just so curious to see what sort of a market exists for small phone people, because we all know the original iPhone SE was very popular, but I bet it was very popular just because it was very cheap, even though there was definitely a vocal group of people who loved it due to the size alone. So yeah, I'm very curious to see what sort of reception it gets, the sales it gets, and if it sticks around for future generations.
And if Apple's smarter this time, because I think the original SE was one of the few times they really, their demand forecasting really was off. Like they anticipated people buying it because it was smaller, but they didn't anticipate the desire for the smaller phone. And it caught them off guard and they just couldn't meet supply for a while. And I'm really curious when you have this many phones, like 4 new phones, how they're going to sort of stagger the production. Like initially people usually buy the more expensive ones because it's the enthusiasts, and then over time the more mainstream phones start to edge those out, and I just don't know where the mini will fit in there.
iOS 14 has also been a fairly major topic. We've had a fairly recent release of iOS 14, and 14.0.1 came out and addressed a couple of the issues with the widgets and default app settings getting reset after reboot. And you had a really good call with John Gruber, which you posted on your YouTube channel as well, which I found very interesting. I guess the big surprise out of iOS 14 was how popular widgets were. What does I know what your home screen looks like, but do you want to, for the audience, just tell us what you've gone with widget-wise?
Yeah, so I went through the same sort of process. I put the beta on the first day, and we were restricted to Apple widgets until it went public a couple weeks ago. So mostly it was just playing around with the Apple widgets. And I wondered how I would react to them, because I've always had an Android phone. I always buy whatever the new Nexus or Pixel phone is every year. And I used a bunch of widgets, especially when, in the Nexus days when it was more interesting sort of HTC variants and things like that. But HTC would always tell you that very few people use them and almost nobody changed them from the default. And I was curious if, because we've never had them, it would almost be like that Ritz cracker thing where this is the most delicious cracker I've ever had. It's because it's been so long since I'd eaten a cracker. And I think I went overboard at the beginning. And it's like, I have widgets now. Finally, I can put them everywhere. And I realized that really slowed me down. Like I didn't have enough density on my home screen anymore. So now I've settled into 2 of the Siri suggested widgets, which are sort of a mixed blessing because they almost always have the app I want, but I have to look, but it's in a different position every time. So I'm gaining sort of z-index when it comes to how many apps I have on my home screen, but I'm losing spatial permanency. So it's just, I don't have to hunt for the app anymore between screens, but I have to hunt for it on the screen. And then I have 4 apps that I never want to not have, which is like notes and camera, because I always use those things. And then I have 1 widget stack, a Siri Smart stack with just battery and a couple other things, calendar, a couple other things I want to use a lot. And that's not so good at determining what I want. So I usually just swipe through that. And I'm super impressed with people like Matthew Casanelli, who puts the Siri shortcuts behind the app. So I've been playing around with that a little bit. But I've mostly just been dumping them on my second home screen and experimenting with what is valuable versus what is just sort of me making widget management a second full-time job.
2 out of 3 people agree with Z-index as the correct pronunciation on this call.
Okay, thank you, Z-index.
Speaking of things in iOS 14 that are kind of a mixed blessing, that's exactly how I feel about the app library. Yeah. From my days of Android, I only had maybe 4 or 5 applications actually on my home screen, and then everything else was put in the app drawer.
I'm the same.
But the thing about the app drawer is, it's organized in a way that I understand. Usually, even if it's just alphabetical, I know where my apps are. But when I go over to the app library, I can switch to alphabetical, but just looking at the default quote unquote folders that are used here, when I have some weird things like my bank account is mixed with I don't know, some kind of restaurant or whatever tags that the developers have associated with their apps that can sometimes be unintuitive. I find myself wishing I could arrange that.
Yeah. I think the thing that Gruber and I settled on is that it's trying to be too clever, because just having an alphabetical list creates a lot of spelunking again. It's like you're going over the app drawer, you're swiping through it, you don't see what you want, so you go faster, then you miss what you want and you have to go back, and it's a little bit of rigmarole. But this doesn't fix that, especially because you have the large size folders with the full size apps that act as apps, but the small size apps that act as subfolders, and the categorizations, you can't overwrite them. Apple sort of chose them, and a lot of them are nonsensical, or they combine apps that just should never be combined together, at least not like where a rational person would look for them. So it feels like they know there's a problem, and this was the best solution they could come up with, but it doesn't really solve anything. It just creates different complexity.
Yeah, this actually isn't too far off for me from how I've had my iPhone configured for probably the last decade. I traditionally had my home screen be fairly close to what comes with your iPhone. Generally the standard Apple layout with a couple of my frequently used apps sprinkled in. And then my second page was just folders for each category of app, and they were all sorted there. So the app library, I was really hoping was going to replace that for me, but that has not been the case yet. Hopefully they can be a little less clever to solve for that.
Yeah, same.
What are the other major features of iOS 14 that anyone's excited about? I think for me, picture-in-picture is a big win. It's nice to finally have it there. But besides that, there's really not too much to get excited about. It was, at least this season, the whole beta season, I found very reliable, very stable. Didn't really have too many crashes or anything like that. The iOS 14.01, which just came out, apparently fixed a lot of Wi-Fi issues and widget issues for people, but I never experienced any of that myself. I just found, the whole, was it July through September, just fairly pleasant when it came to running the new software on my devices.
Yeah, so different from last year, right?
Well, if you were to just take what the commenters on the Apple subreddit said, the number one thing we got, and the about time finally coming of Grice, thank you for finally doing this, is our call banner.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about this too.
That seems to be a theme for iOS 14.
Well, it's just like, I understand, like the old takeover used to, I didn't mind it on the lock screen, and it's still there on the lock screen, but when you were doing something on your phone and it would take it over, sometimes you were tapping your phone and you wouldn't realize it and the call was there, and you'd accidentally hang up on somebody, or you were in the middle of something important, at least more important to you. I mean, who uses their phone as a phone? Why would anybody ever do that to you? But now it comes up in that little banner, and sometimes I don't remember that it's in the banner still, even though I've been using it for months, and I have to look for it and hunt for it and tap on it. Or if I need to get, like, it's someone at the door and I need to get to the numbers to unlock it, the door for them, or to choose between English and French because of where I live, I have to remember I first have to go there, and do I tap this? And I have this beautiful dream for dynamic affordance, where if something happens and you don't respond correctly initially, the target area should grow, the interface should grow. So I would love it if that call banner came up, and if I didn't answer immediately and didn't flick it away, and it sort of feels me tapping random places, just unfurl it for me. Just do me that favor.
I agree that especially once you've entered a call, I feel like the banner should at that point take up full screen, especially with the proximity detector. It sees that you've lifted to your face. Yeah. There's more than one time I've answered a call, been speaking on the phone, and needed to press something, and I pull my phone away, and I'm just on my home screen still, and that's just not intuitive for me at all.
I get that we can't play Fortnite while on the phone anymore, but there's still other things that we might want to do.
Well, that's an excellent segue into another topic that's popped up in the last week, is that Epic's decision to bypass Apple's App Store policies were dishonest, says US judge. So the whole Epic versus Apple saga is continuing and will do for a very long time. But we're getting some comments from judges about it now, and there seems to be verging or siding more with Apple's policies rather than with Epic's actions and behaviors. And as the Reddit user HRidan07 says in the comments, it looks like Epic's fight isn't going to be so epic. And that's what it seems like from the article posted on The Verge, which is well worth a read.
Yeah, I mean, she took them to the woodshed, and it was interesting to see because I think when they initially started, they had a lot of sympathy because you, on one side, you have developers who are just struggling to cope with the mainstreaming of apps, which we saw when music was mainstreamed and when video was mainstreamed and when news was mainstreamed. People went from getting paid a ton of money to write for prominent newspapers to basically everything being available for free on the web. And it was really hard for those industries. And that's happening with apps, where we've gone from really expensive boutique software, that had a very small, very lucrative market, to apps becoming part of pop culture where everybody wants a dozen of them a day and doesn't want to pay a penny for them. And it's been really hard. And Apple hasn't made it easier, or they haven't helped at least. So there's an amazing amount of frustration, both really justified and really silly. And Epic sort of stood up and said, we're going to fight this for you. And initially they looked smart because they did that whole 1984 thing. And then the minute they sued Google too, I was like, I don't think you really know what you're doing, because now people who were sympathetic with you were like, why are you suing Google too? That's what we want from the App Store. And even that's not good enough for you. And then Tim Epic keeps going on Twitter and saying outlandish things. And I think, at least for me, it quickly became a case of, this is not the Batman I want or need. You're just a billionaire who wants to attack these trillionaire companies because they're not making it easy enough for you to supplant them. And you don't care about me as a user. You just want to use me differently. And then I lost a lot of affinity. Like I'm still completely on Team Microsoft for xCloud, for Game Pass, Stadia, all of that. I think the App Store needs fundamental, foundational changes, but Epic just does not seem to be going about this in an above board way at all.
So, well, you did a really great, had some really great coverage on this earlier. You had a really well-researched, unbiased take on your channel a few weeks ago. And I'm curious a bit about more of an opinion-based approach. What do you think your ideal outcome would be as a customer and a consumer of these products? How do you hope this would end?
So, I mean, what I would like to happen, what I think is in the best interests of us, and that ultimately what I care about are users and indie developers, just because I have a huge affection for indie developers, is for Epic to agree to the escrow, because this is going to take a year to litigate, maybe 2 or 3. And just to agree to the escrow, roll back their Epic drop so that Fortnite is back on the App Store. The money's being held for whoever wins this. And I think there are substantive changes that Apple could make to the App Store that would be in our best interests as well. Not everything that Epic wants, because Epic really wants what's good for them. And to be honest, I'm not sure if Apple made the changes all the developers would want, it would really change that much, because the market forces are really going from early adopter to mainstream acceptance, and that's going to change the business. But just things like allowing side-loaded apps, because we live in a world now where China is banning VPNs and America wants to ban TikTok, and we need an escape hatch for that. And you can argue that they'll block the servers anyway, but that's out of the platform's control. The platform should still help us as much as possible, and figure out the basic things like upgrade pricing and demos. Even if you don't think it's going to make a big change and you think it's going to add some complexity, it would remove so much frustration and remove so much pressure that I think it would just be in the best interest of anybody. So, sorry, I went off on a complete tangent there, but I would like Epic and Apple to put their customers first, go through the escrow, go through the lawsuit, get Fortnite back on the store, and stop using us as pawns.
Do you worry about, in a world where sideloading is allowed, or even alternative app stores at some point in the future, a developer like Facebook, who has had their certificates revoked in the past for the data snooping, to just say, well, you have to sideload our app now, and we're going to go around all these requirements, and this is going to be at a huge cost to users' privacy? I
think that, that's always true. When you do those sorts of things, it's always true. But I think Apple has solved this pretty effectively on the Mac, like with the gatekeeper system and with all the certifications, the trusted certificates that go with that, that I think they could solve it just as well on iOS. And we've seen things like the Alt Store has done a really good job. I mean, the dirty secret is that you've always been able to install, self-signed apps and enterprise apps. There's always been a way for people who had the tools and the connections to run whatever they want anyway. And I think that is different than, I mean, there are concerns, financial concerns. Big developers don't want the idea of cracked apps, and they inevitably think sideloading will lead to cracked apps, especially for games. And then those cracked apps will contain spyware. That all of that is true. But Epic, in their own claim, said that it didn't work for them on Android. So few people do it, and it's so scary for them that it's not a viable business. And I think that also shows that it would be restricted to a very, very small amount of the population. And with the ability to revoke certificates, I think it'd be a safe enough compromise for us.
One aspect of this that I was interested in is Epic's lawyer tried to point out that in the short time that this alternative payment method was up in the app, 50% of people opted to use that, and tried to argue that as a case for people wanting alternative payment methods. And then Apple's lawyer, I think, correctly responded that it actually demonstrates that 50% of people are willing to pay more to continue using Apple's ecosystem. And at least for me, that's exactly how I feel. I'd feel much more secure going through Apple's payment processing methods than some obscure ones. I'm sure if I was allowed to use PayPal or something, that'd be a little bit of a different story.
Yeah, that's where I think, I have a huge amount of respect for Ben Thompson. And he recently pointed out that, Apple sidestepped the whole internet when they were talking about the evolution of app stores from box software. And I think that's true. But as someone who was a massive mobile user before the App Store on Windows Mobile and on Trio, it was bad. I mean, very, very few people globally had access to the internet, and apps, getting them was hard. You would have someone like Gruber linking to a site, or even like Leo Laporte linking to a site, and that site would go down. And I think, for example, _David Smith and Widget Smith, it went viral on TikTok, and everybody who wanted it could get it. And that would not be the case if you go back to the pre-App Store era and you don't have like Google Play infrastructure or Apple infrastructure behind it. Your developer website would last 3.2 seconds from hitting the drop zone until it was completely overwhelmed. So I think there are definite tangible advantages. It's just about pricing it fairly for the market in a way that benefits the platform owner, the developer, and the user.
And the last thing that really interests me coming from this article is Judge Gonzalez Rogers recommended that this case be taken in front of a jury. And when you put a case like this in front of a group of people, I worry about their level of understanding of the nuance, and I'm sure a lot of that will be sell out for them. But when I think of something like the U.S. government and their very limited knowledge of electronics and data privacy and things like that, I worry about this group of peers they'll be put in front of it. I hope that they'll be technologically literate enough to understand the nuances of this case.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because she basically said that you're going to appeal, if I just render a decision. And maybe she's framing it that a jury decision is harder to overturn on appeal. Because I think she made it really clear that she wasn't on their side just as purely as a matter of law, like established law. The thing about jury trials is that they're scary for everybody involved. Like Epic, even if the law's not on their side, they can argue the jury. They can jury nullify. There's many more tools in their disposal. But equally, they could lose, and they could lose potentially bigger than what a judgment would give them. And I think maybe part of the hope is that it becomes scary enough that cooler, more rational heads prevail, and they settle. And I say that with full realization that Apple and Samsung just settled their lawsuit like last month. The final paperwork was done, so it's a multi-year process. But hopefully, it puts a little bit of fear of the legal system in their hearts and minds.
Well, I wonder if this is almost going in Epic's favor, because they've been playing to the court of public opinion this whole time, more so than worried about the law being exactly on their side. So I wonder how much they would be able to leverage something like that as well.
I have this nagging question in the back of my head, and I was tweeting about it earlier today, but you're seeing Epic and Spotify and Tinder Match, pushing back against the App Store, and hardware and platforms. But platforms aren't limited to hardware or operating systems. And I wonder, when you look at things like the advent of sponsorships and networks like OnlyFans that have much more creator-centric, collective, direct relationships, if at some point someone like Ninja will say, "Hey, I'm worth an awful lot, and you better give me my own skin and emote store in Fortnite," and like the same way Epic wants their store in the App Store, or Taylor Swift and Drake say, "Yeah, we're the ones producing this stuff. We want our own subscription store inside Spotify because you're a monopoly. You have control of this market, this huge market of audio streaming. And we don't think it's fair that you get part of our profits. So we want the chance to sell to our fans directly using your customer base," which is essentially Epic and Spotify's own argument. I just wonder how deeply that argument will scale over time.
So this could very easily set a precedent going forward for things like that happening in the future.
Everybody has a store.
What if all you needed to do was to have a $500 hardware console in your living room, and then you could stream whatever you purchased on that to your iPhone instead, which is a fairly bad segue into the next topic, which is Microsoft's new Xbox app will let you stream Xbox One games to your iPhone. So this is not xCloud. This is streaming from your own console in your living room, but able to do it not just on Wi-Fi, but also on your LTE or maybe 5G connection soon. So this app's in test flight at the moment, it seems like. But from the video posted by Tom Warren on the Verge article, it seems like quite a good user experience. Are you much of a gamer, Rene?
I haven't had time in a long time. I used to be when I was like 2-3 years ago. I had every console and I was playing all the time. And it's just, especially now, I have very little time to play anymore. But I'm super interested by all of this technology, both good and bad. Like we saw all music go from CDs to iTunes to Apple Music and Spotify. And we've seen video go from DVDs and Blu-rays to Netflix and Disney Plus. And there's subscriptions for everything. Like you used to have to pick and choose what magazines you want. Now there's News Plus. And I just wonder, video games used to cost us $60 to $90 a cartridge, and now it's going to be almost all you can play for $10 a month. And I think Apple is completely blind. Like I don't think they're malicious in not allowing xCloud on. I think they're just blind to games being just another stream the way Netflix is. And this feels like a very Valve-like solution, like they did with Steam. And it seems inelegant and a bad experience and not something Apple should want for their customers. Like I'm glad it works, but I think Apple just has to realize that all of this stuff is becoming, anything that is a bit is going to be streamed. And Amazon has had subscription apps for a long time. I'm sure Google was already working on subscription apps and cloud, and Apple has got all the technology imaginable for edge computing. We just seem a little blind to this future reality, which would behoove them. It would be better for glasses and all the products they want to make. But I don't know. They seem not to be able to make that mental leap yet.
I'm tentatively optimistic about game streaming services in general. It seems like the reception of Stadia wasn't quite as warm as Google was hoping, and I'm hoping that it's just a limitation of the technology right now, and as internet speeds increase and we're able to minimize lag as much as possible, that this becomes a more viable option, and we do see things like xCloud gain adoption on platforms like iOS.
And Luna now too.
Yeah, that's the new Amazon one, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be a progressive web app, so it goes right around any App Store policies or restrictions.
Wow.
Right, yeah.
What are you streaming with Luna? I'm not familiar with that one.
It's Amazon's new, it's very similar to xCloud. It's just Amazon is doing it, and they're doing it through the browser, not through a local client. So I'm guessing it'll be some function of WebGL. I'm waiting for Apple to announce WebMetal. It's just a matter of time, but I'm guessing it's using WebGL and other technologies to try to make a native-like experience.
We're going to go back to the days of the original iPhone. Remember when I'd go to Apple's website to play with the web apps in 2007, because that was your only way.
Well, first we had Web 2.0 apps, then we had HTML5 apps, and now we have progressive web apps. And it's like it's always coming, but never quite arriving.
That's the first time I've heard the term web metal, but that sounds quite interesting as well.
It just seems inevitable, because that's like Apple built out well, they were slow to embrace WebGL, but there were obvious security concerns there. But they've built the metal stack so deeply, it makes all the sense in the world to me that they would have web metal at some point.
The last thing on our list was another article from The Verge and submitted to Reddit by Maltese Apple fan. It's past time for the Apple Watch to add Qi wireless charging.
Yeah, this is interesting to me because it almost feels like Apple is leaning the opposite direction. To charge such a small device on a Qi charger is going to be finicky at best, and Apple's solution to that was the magnetic ring in the watch. And it seems like, if rumors are true, we'll be seeing that in iPhone 12 this year, and we might see all proprietary wireless chargers moving forward.
Yeah, it is, because the watch started off, like the original prototypes of the watch were Qi based, and they're using a variant of Qi. It's not a big variant, but it's enough that you can't use it with a standard Qi charger. And it was just to solve problems that they had back then, which was charging a small battery that they didn't want to damage fast enough while not having because I've had inductive charging devices since the Palm Pre, and you knock them off so regularly. Like I'd move my blanket on my bed and it would not, I wouldn't notice, but it would just move off enough of the charger and I'd wake up with no phone, and it was endlessly frustrating. Although Palm was really early to the magnets. They were always I think they had one of the best solutions early on. And so Apple added the magnet to it, and it complicated their own lives, obviously, with AirPower. It made that way more difficult. But they've been increasing it on its own. And if you just go to basic Qi, I don't think it makes it better. Like it makes it more convenient for some people, but I don't think it makes it better. And Apple seems to have this ambition to superset Qi and then share that and hope that Qi adopts it. I don't know if that'll work that way, but my understanding is that ring won't change Qi's compatibility. It'll just be an extra that if you have one of the chargers with built-in magnetics, you'll know that it's not going to move off of it. But I'm interested to see where they take it, because Qi hasn't taken off. Like I was hoping that we'd have it in every Starbucks, every airport, everywhere. It would be ubiquitous, because that's when it becomes really valuable. If you can just put your phone down anywhere and charge it, any of your stuff, and we're nowhere near that yet.
Well, the first time I mentioned the ring of magnets on the back of the upcoming iPhone to my mother, she was horrified, because she's one of those people that they keep her credit cards in a case on the back of her phone. So I think maybe case manufacturers are going to have to come up with maybe like a metal plate or something in the back of these cases if they want to still support credit cards.
That's only a problem in the United States, though, where credit cards are still a thing, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the rest of the civilized world's moved on to tap to pay.
I forget, it was like 8 years ago, we still had the Singleton conference in Montreal, and I picked up a bunch of developer friends from Cupertino who were coming down to the show, and I stopped at the airport to get gas, and I just tapped my wallet to the gas pump and then filled up, and one of them stuck their head out and goes, "What kind of weird Canadian magic is that?" It never occurred to me. It was just because it was ubiquitous. You paid for everything that way. Right.
And even the gas pumps here in the US that have tap to pay built in, it's disabled. And I am endlessly frustrated by that, because I'd love to use my Apple Pay for everything.
They're not disabled here, but for some reason they error out a lot with the Apple Watch. Works fine if I tap like my wallet, but if I tap the Apple Watch, as often as not, it gives me some weird error.
When I visited the US a few years ago, the funny thing I found was that a lot of pumps actually wanted like the magnetic swipe to be used still. But with an Australian credit card, if you use the magnetic swipe, you just automatically get flagged as a fraudulent transaction. So every time I filled up with petrol, I was just getting my cards blocked.
And when a waiter walks away with your card, you're like, what is happening? I don't understand.
Yeah,
why are they taking
come
my
back? Any other thoughts on Qi?
I just wanted to get better, and I think the magnets will. I mean, I'm hopeful that either smart engineering would stop it from being a problem with magnetized cards, because that's got to be on the repercussion modeling list for things we shouldn't do with this. But then, as you said, when cases get involved, it's going to be interesting too. But I wonder what other form factors they can enable, because obviously there'll be either Apple or Belkin or whoever they work with for release day that just has a Qi pad that locks onto those magnets. But will there be car mounts? Will there be kitchen mounts? Like, I wonder how interesting and far they can use this technology.
Yeah, Qi does just need to get better before it becomes widespread. I know just from, personal anecdotes from the people around me. Qi just it's not reliable compared to plugging in a cable, because like the cheaper Qi chargers do tend to be made from cheap slippery plastic, and sometimes just walking past on floorboards is enough to move the phone enough that you're not getting charged anymore. And just two or three experiences like that, and someone's plugging their phone in again. So I think that's part of the reason that we're not just seeing them in every cafe and every airport. But I guess even just like with USB charging, there is a shallow slope, and then it'll ramp up after a few years.
And the latest few iPhone generations have been almost frictionless surfaces, which is maddening. So anything they can do to keep them in place, it would be a bonus.
I think that's all we've got then. Well, thanks again for joining us, Rene. You can find me at JamesVDM on Reddit and on Twitter.
I'm Jellywoot on Reddit and Twitter.
And we have the subreddit, reddit.com/r/the_r_apple_show. And Rene, give us any plugs you want to put in.
I'm incredibly monotonous. I'm just at Rene Ritchie or /Rene Ritchie on pretty much everything, Twitter, YouTube, you name it. And I had a blast being here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, and feel free to shamelessly rip off the show format at any point in the future. That's completely welcome.
I forgot to mention that's how this turned out, because you made a video about reacting to Redditors' comments on the Apple subreddit.
I'm trying to find more interesting ways of covering Apple news. I don't want to be too repetitive. Like when I started at iMore, my goal was to never have a homepage that looked like Mac Rumors or 9 to 5 Mac, and I never want to have a YouTube channel that looks like any existing tech YouTube channel. So I keep trying things, and if you think any of them are stupid, always just please let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to just keep experimenting and see how it goes.
Please keep experimenting.
But I like the subreddits, and I actually got the idea from Devin Stone, who does the Legal Eagle channel, and he'll react to / bad legal advice, which is hilarious to me. Like, it's like, don't admit to anything. Stop that. Don't admit to anything.
Is that good legal advice?
Yeah, well, he'll say that because they're giving bad legal advice. But I thought it would just be interesting to see how people, first, how different people prioritize stories and news and opinions. And also because Reddit seems to bring out like a lot of, it's that old joke, the internet plus anonymity equals extremist views, just because people don't see each other. And I thought it'd be interesting to see people who were either all for something or all against something, and how it could play off of that.
Yeah, the old hive mind, or the collective, whatever you want to call it, tends to rear its ugly head. Not too often, thankfully, in the Apple subreddit, but there are certainly some toxic subreddits, and even ones that have been just removed from Reddit entirely because they were just so bad.
It's like Twitter and Reddit, they don't like the idea of multiple truths. Like there are often, Apple did something stupid, but it was the least stupid of the choices that they had to go through according to them. Maybe they chose wrong, but there's always like nuance to these things that I feel get lost on the internet.
Yeah, nuance is the very first thing to go, I think.